What's up, boxing fans? Episode 15 of the Slip and Wheat Podcast. Let's get it. Skirt. Basically Saturday now. It's back. There's less kind of middle of the week cards than there was the last couple of weeks when we were first getting going, because the names are starting to get a little bigger. So as the names get bigger, they're pushing the fights back to the weekends. And, there's been some really exciting matchups the last couple of weeks. There were some great ones last week. Some smaller ones I want to talk about just because I enjoyed watching them. But just to kick it off, there was a cool upset in Germany. There's a heavyweight journeyman named Kevin Johnson, who is 35-17-1 with 19 knockouts, and he stopped former cruiserweight champion Juan Pablo Hernandez, who is 29-2, and he stopped him in the 7th round. Generally speaking, I've seen Johnson before. He went the distance with everybody. He went the distance with Vitaly Klitschko, Fury, Derek Chisora, Andy Ruiz. I think AJ might have stopped him, but it's very rare that he gets stopped. He's just one of those very durable heavyweights that knows how to go rounds with guys, but doesn't necessarily have the offensive output to win these fights. But, this fight, he looked really switched on. He was on the front foot, and he really took it to Hernandez. And, it's nice to see somebody like Kevin Johnson where, he's working hard, he shows up to win, but, he's always kind of coming in as the A side. And, it's cool to see him get this victory against that caliber of opponent. Hernandez had 2 wins over a prime Steve Cunningham. And, at the time, those were really nice wins. So this is probably the best win of Johnson's career. Johnson's about 40 years old, and it was a good weekend for 40-year-old men, let me tell you. So I was impressed, man. I don't know what this means because Hernandez looked a little bit shot. It had been some time, 5-6 years since he had fought, and I know he's had elbow surgery and knee surgery, and, he's been going through it. But either way, at least morally, congrats to Kevin Johnson. So, speaking of good weekends for 40-year-old men, Eddie Hearn's Backyard Boxing, that's what I'm calling it, Backyard Boxing. The 4th installment of Backyard Boxing was this weekend with some great fights on it. The co-main being the rematch between Katie Taylor and Delphine Persoon, and the main event being Alexander Povetkin and Dillian Whyte at heavyweight. The Taylor-Persoon fight, if you saw the first one, you know that when these two girls get matched up, it's fucking intense because Katie's got really good classical technical skills, but she can't help but mix it up when you start tagging her up. And Persoon is just completely relentless. She just doesn't stop. It's a very awkward style, and she's very tall and coming forward. She doesn't really mind missing a bunch of punches to land one good one. So her hands are always moving. She's always busy, and the best thing you can do is try to get a couple off on her and go around and just try to stay away from her. Or you got to be all the way inside because she's really long and she's just going to keep coming at you throwing. The first one was razor thin, but the truth be told, Katie was kind of limping across the finish line by the end of the 10th round. This one was a little different. It was a similar fight where, down the stretch, it did get to be a little bit more of a physical fight, and Persoon was able to make it at least more competitive. But for the most part, Katie pretty much gave her a boxing lesson and I think pulled away from her, where there really is no need for a third one. Because I think she showed, there's no way this girl can beat her. She just doesn't quite have the skill set. She has the will and the style to be problematic, but not to beat her. And I think that Katie Taylor right now, if you look at her accomplishments, you look at who she's fought, she's fought 3-4 women that are in the top 10 pound for pound. So I think at this point she's got to be the number one women's fighter in the world. And I had read somewhere that her next fight, Eddie Hearn's looking into matching her and Amanda Serrano up, which I would love to see that fight. Serrano's another, extremely exciting fighter in that weight neighborhood. So I'm hoping they can put that together. That's two of the very best fighters in the world, pound for pound in women's boxing. And I think that's the kind of fight that has the potential. Women's boxing is fucking killing it right now. But a fight like that has the ability to elevate it to a different level, where you can start putting together these marquee matchups where people really want to know what's going to happen in that fight. There's no A side, there's no B side. That's a 50. And unfortunately, I guess you don't see it that much in women's boxing. The best one I can think of is Claressa Shields and Christina Hammer. Were kind of the two best in that weight class. And so I hope they can put that fight together because I love that matchup. And I think that's really a 50-50 fight. Dillian Whyte, I did an episode about this many episodes ago. This was in the first couple of episodes. But since October of 2017, so it's August, almost 3 years, Dillian Whyte has been the mandatory to the WBC belt. And for those 3 years, Deontay Wilder has not fought him. I'm not sure how he's gotten away with that. I'm not sure what the point of even having a ranking system is if in no way are you going to enforce your mandatory. And obviously, Wilder's been fighting big names. He's been fighting Tyson Fury twice. He's been fighting Luis Ortiz twice. But, at one point, the guy fought Dominic Breazeale. And Whyte is a much better fighter than Dominic Breazeale. So, put that all into context. Fury beat Wilder in the second fight. Now he has the WBC belt. Essentially, he was kind of standing in the way of Fury and Joshua fighting after the third Wilder fight, assuming that Fury wins. Because Whyte would have now become Tyson Fury's WBC mandatory. So he would have had dibs on the winner of that fight over Anthony Joshua, in theory. So he loses that, right? And he loses the ability to, demand anything. Povetkin is, he's a 41-year-old guy. He's fought a lot of top guys, man. He fought Vladimir Klitschko in his prime, fought Michael Hunter. He gave Joshua a great fight. I mean, a really tough fight. So this is a top-level guy, right? This is, this guy can beat any heavyweight on any given night. But the first 4 rounds, really, Dillian was up on him. The 4th round, he drops him twice. And then he just loses focus for a second. And that one punch fucks up 5 years of, building himself up since the Joshua fight. And 3 years of being a mandatory. And the one thing I want to say about that is that I feel like he's one of those guys, he said the carrot being dangled in front of him for too long, and maybe there's a part of him that's starting to believe that he's never going to get to eat the carrot. And if he starts to believe that he's never going to eat the carrot, maybe he's not, pursuing the sport with as much passion. And I'm not saying that he didn't fight well. I'm not saying that he wasn't in shape. But to be honest with you, I'm surprised this didn't happen earlier because the guy's game is a little flimsy. A lot of these hard fights that he's in, they're hard fights. He had 2 hard fights with Chisora. He had a really hard fight with Oscar Rivas where he gets dropped and he's got to pull himself up. And he's fighting top guys. You can't take that from him. He is only fighting top guys. Joseph Parker, another one, where he's barely getting to the finish line. And it's like, how many times are you going to bring this guy in as the A side and he's going to pick himself up off the deck and show big balls and finish the fight and win the fight? How many times can the guy do that before you actually give him his shot? You know what I mean? I feel like it stunted his growth a little bit, just having to, just keep waiting and waiting and waiting. And, there's no overarching governing body in boxing that dictates that justice. Like, the WBC has had him mandatory for 3 years and has not made the champion fight him. Whether it was Wilder, whether it's Fury right now, the champ is not being forced to fight his mandatory in the heavyweight rankings of the WBC. So what do you do with that? And I feel bad for him because now, I know he's going to do the rematch. He's got a good chance of winning the rematch. I would think he's maybe not the favorite, but it's at least a 50-50 fight. And if he's really on his P's and Q's, he should be able to beat Povetkin. Even though Povetkin does everything pretty well, he should be able to fucking beat him. And if he can't, it might be a wrap for the career. You know what I mean? Unless he's willing to completely rebuild himself from the start. Go back to fighting jobbers and working your way back up. Because that would really be the only alternative at that point. So, Hearn says they're going to do the rematch, sometime in December, November, before the end of the year. So definitely look out for that rematch because there is a lot at stake. The winner of that rematch is going to be deserving of a really big fight in the heavyweight division. The winner of this fight is in the mix with Wilder, Fury, and Joshua, without a doubt. That was a DAZN card. PBC did a card in Los Angeles. Main event being Shawn Porter taking on undefeated Sebastian Fundora. But before that, Sebastian Formella. But before that, there was a 6'6" junior middleweight named Sebastian Fundora who stopped a guy named Nathaniel Gallimore. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see this kid. He's 15-0-1 with 10 knockouts, and he's a 6'6" junior middleweight. If you don't know what a junior middleweight is 154 pounds. So how a man who is 6'6" gets down to that weight, I cannot fathom. But he does it, and he's substantially bigger than everyone that he fights. The problem is he doesn't use it. He does not use his height at all. His whole game is an inside game. So I've never seen somebody that tall and that much taller than anyone they're going to fight that has no sense of the advantage they have. So he gets hit with shit that there's really no reason he should get hit with it. Because he's so much taller. If he knew how to really keep guys on the end of his jab, establish distance with his footwork, use the ropes as almost as an advantage, as a stopping point to get off some good straight shots going around. He doesn't do any of that shit. He's right on the inside slugging it out. And he hits hard, and he's effective, and he's a great puncher. But it seems like a kind of Paul Williams type situation where, it's only a matter of time before he gets clocked and put out, unless he puts his skills together. If not, he's just going to be an abnormally tall guy for that weight class that's very, very entertaining, which would be a great career. But I think this is, he's 22. This is somebody who has the potential to be a little bit more than that, I think. I don't think he needs to be Arturo Gatti if he doesn't want to be. And even if that is his mentality, I think he should learn the distance game. He should learn those things because there's other guys in that weight class that are tall that know how to do that. Even if they're 6'1", 6'2", they know how to use that. And I think somebody shorter than him would be able to outbox him if they have real boxing skills. Because he doesn't make guys pay for staying on the outside. It's not a busy jab. It's not a hard jab that he throws. So I like watching this kid, but hard to know where he's going to go. Gallimore's a tough guy, and he's fought some tough guys. He beat Jason Rosario. But it wasn't, once Fundora started getting downhill, Gallimore was pretty much just standing there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as Fundora steps up, We'll see. But the main event, Shawn Porter beating Sebastian Formella. Porter, this I think was the first time he fought since the Spence fight, which was razor thin. And he looked good. He did a little of this, he did a little of that. It was an opponent that was tough and had just enough kind of defensive skill to stay out of the way of enough to get through the round. You know, he would throw a little counter shot here and there. It was a good opponent for him to gauge his skill. Obviously, I don't think this is a guy that in a million years could have beaten Shawn Porter or could have, you know, caught him with one and put him out. But the guy was no slouch. He knew how to box, and you know, Porter showed a little of everything. He could get inside, pop off some combinations. He spent some time kind of being light on his feet and bouncing around and trying to box more. So you could see, you know, he was trying stuff out, and he didn't get the stoppage because I don't think he had. It's not that he didn't care, but I don't think the mentality was like, oh, I gotta end this fight. You know, it's been a year almost since he fought, and you know, he's got a very competent guy in front of him, and so why not, you know, try some things out. So I think he had a great performance. You know, I'm not sure what the plan is for him, but you know, he's fought Danny Garcia, he's fought Keith Thurman, he's fought Errol Spence, he's fought Kell Brook. You know, he's fought the best in the weight class, and every time he's right in the mix. So, you know, I would love to see him and Keith get it again. Keith needs an opponent, and he's coming off the loss to Pacquiao. You know, I was hearing that maybe Keith and Crawford were going to get it on at one point, and that never happened. So I think Keith and Shawn need to do a round two, because the winner of that fight absolutely gets a shot at Spence, Pacquiao, Crawford, the top of the division. So good win for Shawn Porter, for sure. Very impressive. The last big card was the return of the ESPN MGM bubble. A lot of good young talent. Guy named Robert Rodriguez, who is trained by Robert Garcia, who's always got good fighters. If you hear Robert Garcia, trained by Robert Garcia, anywhere in there, there's a very good chance that the guy can really fucking fight. That's a safe bet. That's a safe bet. He doesn't seem to be taking on any slouches right now. So not much to say there, because it was a first round knockout, but obviously the kid's got great power for, I believe he's a super bantamweight or a light featherweight, 122 pounds. Another first round knockout was by a guy named Julian Rodriguez. He knocked out a guy named Anthony Laureano. Rodriguez 20-0, 13 knockouts. Junior welterweight. You know, it's hard to tell sometimes with these first round knockouts, but what you can tell is that one guy is clearly at a different level than the average fighter. And you could see that from both Rodriguez, Robert Rodriguez, and Julian Rodriguez, not related. You know, that they both have something special. Robert Rodriguez being 9-0-1 with 5 knockouts, so he's a little earlier on in his boxing career, in his journey. But I think both of these guys have great futures. They also had Clay Collard back on. Again, I know I've been talking about this guy 3-4 times since I started this podcast, but he's just always fighting right now. And he's 9-2-3 with 4 knockouts, and he beat out a guy named Maurice Williams at middleweight. Got a second round knockout. If you haven't seen Clay Collard, he's a former MMA fighter, and a lot of times when you see guys make that transition, their style is a little bit unique because they have that combat sports background, but they don't necessarily have the classical training. But the thing about this guy that's different is that he really knows how to sit down on his punches. He doesn't throw arm punches, and if he does, it's to set something more meaningful up. And he's got a good boxing IQ. It's an awkward style where he's just sort of, you know, coming forward with straight punches, but he's very effective, and he keeps beating these guys that have better records than him or are undefeated. And I think it's hard to know what the ceiling is for this guy, because he's very dominant. in all of these performances. It's not like he's having a hard time with these guys. He is walking through the opponents they're putting in front of him to the point where, they may have to step up his competition pretty soon. So definitely check out Clay Collard, man. I think there's something special brewing here, even if it's just that, he was a late bloomer in the sport because he started in MMA and successfully made the transition. But I have a feeling you're going to see this guy on TV a lot going forward. The co-main was middleweight Rob Brandt stopping Vitaly Kopalenko in the 5th round. I haven't seen a lot of Brandt. I've seen him in various ranking things on ESPN or for belts or whatever. I know he got stopped by Murata in Japan. But he put on a nice measured boxing performance and really just overwhelmed Kopalenko, who was kind of stiff and, he just didn't have an answer for what Brandt was bringing. I don't necessarily know how good Kopalenko is, so it's hard for me to tell how good Brandt is, but it looks like he can do a lot of different things. He can get on the back foot, but they kept talking about how he's a volume puncher. So I may need to go back and watch some of what he does to see what he does. And the main event was Joe Smith Jr. stopping Eleider Alvarez, which I was very, very surprised by, to be honest. I think had I done a prediction of that one, I would have gotten that wrong. Alvarez split 2 fights with Kovalev, and the Kovalev stoppage in the first fight was just so sudden and impressive, and he showed great power. Anytime I've seen him, he's got a nice skill set, and I'm not sure what happened, man. He kind of just let Smith bully him around and beat on him. And anytime Smith has fought at this level, he's lost. He's lost to Dimitri Bivol. He's lost to Sullivan Barrera. Those are top-level light heavyweights. And my thinking was that at some point, Alvarez's experience and pedigree and just the fact that he's fought and beaten much better fighters, I think, even than Joe Smith is, I would have thought that, I'll be honest, I would have thought it was easy work, and I was wrong. Smith really put his hands together, stayed on the front foot. He wasn't afraid to just hit Alvarez on the gloves. And, he showed a few more dimensions in this one than I've seen from him. He showed a creativity in what kind of punches and what kind of combinations he can throw, and defensively a little more creative. He wasn't just there to get hit. It's hard to know how much he would have gotten hit if Alvarez's activity was higher, but he did not take a beating. And I think it's a part of it is because he was more defensively responsible. So having seen him lose to the best in the division, I don't know where he goes from here, but maybe he gets a fight with Kovalev or, with another one of the top guys that isn't Bivol, be it, Beterbiev or whoever. But, light heavyweight is interesting. And this guy, for whatever reason, multiple times now I've seen him pull out upsets against guys that, in theory, should be able to beat him because of who he's lost to. So big ups to Joe Smith, man. Proving me wrong, big time. Congratulations to him. It was very impressive. The last thing I'm going to talk about today was on Friday, the 21st, was the return of the great Sergio Martinez, who fought in Spain for the first time in 6 years. It seems like a lot of these older guys are getting the bug. We see the Tyson Jones fight gets made. Oscar De La Hoya wants to make a comeback. There's a lot of these older guys that want to keep doing it. But I think this guy is different for a lot of different reasons. I know he's 45, but if you know anything about the Sergio Martinez story, you know that he started really late, that he walked into a boxing gym for the first time at 20. So the mileage that he has on him in the long run is less than somebody his age. So I put on the fight. I found it on YouTube, and I was more or less prepared to watch him embarrass himself. He's had a lot of knee injuries, and, Cotto just beat him up so bad. It just didn't seem plausible that he would even be physically capable of fighting again. But, surprisingly, his hand speed is still tremendous. His hand speed is still really good. His reflexes are still really good. His upper body movement is still really good. And his ability to flex at the waist and bend and make punches miss. The guy he's fighting was no world beater, but he knew how to box. He knew how to throw a punch, And Martinez stopped him in the 7th round and basically completely dominated the fight, And the one place I would say I noticed the biggest difference was in how he moves around the ring. If you watch his old fights, the guy used to play soccer and was a cyclist, and he would just glide around the ring. Even in his mid-late 30s, he would just glide around the ring. He was so fast, and his feet were so coordinated, and his mind was operating at a different speed than everyone else. He doesn't have that as much anymore. It's a much more plodding movement. He's a little more planted when he throws than he was. So maybe he hits a little harder, but aside from that, for a guy his age who hasn't fought in as long as he has, it was very impressive. He was not afraid to let his hands go, throw in combination. And, I don't know what he's going to do. But one thing I know is that I enjoyed watching him the other night. I would love to see him again. I don't necessarily want to see him in with the top of the top, but, if these older legends want to fight, and they want to fight at a certain level, a certain lower level, or they want to fight each other, I say bravo, man. There's, boxing is never a safe sport, but if there was a safe way to do it, it's fighting guys that are manageable and fighting guys your age, even if they are legends. The danger level in fighting somebody like that is just different. It's different than him getting in with Golovkin right now, which I don't think would be realistic. But with this guy, I learned a lot about him this weekend because I went back and I watched that Maravilla movie that they made about him, the documentary. And I learned a lot about where he came from and, his struggle in the sport. If you don't know Martinez, he's from Argentina. He's like a strikingly good-looking dude. He's like a model, and he started late. And, he was a soccer player, and, when he started boxing, he had a hard time getting guys to fight him because he didn't have a lot of experience and he wasn't a big name, but he was a problem. He was a lot to manage in that ring, man. And, he came from poverty, and the guy had to scrap for everything he fucking got. And he moved to Spain to try to, elevate his career and, fought his way to a championship, even with, bad decisions and this and that. And the most interesting thing about his career and about the shit that he went through that I learned from this movie was that I think it was in 2011, he had the WBC middleweight belt, and the WBC said that he had to fight a mandatory against a guy named Sebastian Zibic. And at the time, Zibic wasn't really a name like that. So HBO, who had Martinez's television contract, said, this is not a compelling opponent. This is not good enough for our network, basically. And, why don't we find you a more compelling opponent? So he takes on Sergey Zinzurek, who, if you remember, Sergey Zinzurek at the time was 37-0 and was a very credible opponent, very big, tall southpaw. So Martinez destroys Zinzurek, destroys him. and they take his belt because he didn't fight as mandatory. So HBO has essentially facilitated the WBC stripping the middleweight champion of his belt. So they give the belt to Zibic, and within weeks, the WBC mandates that Zibic make a mandatory defense against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who is the son of, he's called the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. I think that'll change when Canelo retires, but he's the son of a legend. And, they were saying that that Zibic wasn't worthy of fighting on the network at all. Not against Martinez, just not at all. He's not worthy of the network. But they approved the Chavez fight, and Chavez beats Zibic and becomes the WBC champion. So Martinez is trying, and his promoter Lou DiBella are like, well, you got to fight us, because we fought who HBO wanted and they took the belt. So you have to fight us. And they cannot get Chavez to fight him. And they cannot get Top Rank to make Chavez fight him. And so they also find out that the president of the WBC is Julio Cesar Chavez Jr.'s godfather. So there's direct ties between the Chavez family and the WBC as an organization. So Martinez and Lou DiBella show up at the WBC convention, and Lou DiBella starts hooting and hollering, and he says, yo, you guys took this belt from him. You haven't mandated that the champion fight him, and you have to make Chavez fight Martinez. This is your real champion. And you could see Suleiman, the president, is very aggravated. He doesn't want to fucking hear it. He's like, yo, you gotta just go sit down, bro. And DiBella's being queens as fuck, just yelling, and he's mad. He's trying to represent his fighter. So at the end, he's like, I have to show you one more thing. And he pulls out this napkin and he says, most contracts aren't on napkins, but ours was. And he pulls it out and he's like, this is a document between you and between me that says that Chavez has to fight Martinez. And I just want to remind you of what you agreed to. So the president, Suleiman, makes everybody on the board, whatever the board is, take a vote, and they mandate that Chavez Jr. has to fight Sergio Martinez. So it's like this great victory. But at the time, it was December, and they keep just putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And meantime, Martinez has 2 more fights because he's got to stay busy. At the time, he was 37, 38, got to stay busy. And they're like, is this fight going to fucking happen? And I think at a certain point, they both kind of feel like it's not. And then they finally get the call that Chavez wants to fight, Top Rank wants to fight, and him and Bob make the fight happen. And the rest is history. Martinez outboxed them for 11 rounds straight, and Chavez came out in the 12th round, put Martinez on his ass, and Martinez got up like a champion, and they slugged it out to the final bell. But, when 12 were done, even though Chavez dropped him, there was really no doubt who the better fighter was, that Martinez had really, danced circles around them for 11 rounds, and, the real champion was established again. And it's cool to see movies like that, man. Sometimes you don't always get a behind the curtain of the boxing business and the boxing industry and how it fucks with fighters so often. And I think if we got to see that more often, we'd appreciate these guys even more, because it's not just staying in the gym and staying fit. There's all this other fucking bullshit you have to deal with. And for all you know, the champion, could be the godson of, the president of the organization that is the belt that they have, and they get preferential treatment. So, boxing is a very dirty business, and for somebody like Sergio Martinez to, rise above that, I think that's what boxing is all about. So it's cool seeing him make a comeback this weekend, and I hope that whatever he does, he stays within himself. Next week is finally going to be Jose Ramirez and Victor Postol. This is the 3rd time they tried to do this fight, so you have to hope that it actually happens. That's going to be on ESPN. And then on Fox, Erislandy Lara is going to take on a guy named Greg Vendetti, who I'm guessing he's going to dust. And that's it, guys. This has been episode 15 of the Slip and Weave podcast. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next week. Peace.